North Africa, March 1943. The desert wind carried dust over a column of German vehicles halted near the town of Sfax. Among them stood a small olive-green machine that looked almost like a toy, an American Willys Jeep, captured intact after a skirmish with retreating U.S. forces. It was light, square, and unassuming, nothing like the massive half-tracks and armored cars the Wehrmacht relied on. A corporal kicked one of its thin tires and laughed. But when an engineer started the engine, the laughter faded. The motor fired instantly, steady, even unbothered by the sand-choked air. They drove it in circles, then over dunes, expecting it to stall. It didn't. It simply kept moving. By the end of the afternoon, German officers had ordered it loaded onto a transport. It would soon travel north to the proving grounds at Kummersdorf, where curiosity would turn into disbelief. By early 1943, the North African campaign had become a war of mobility. The Afrika Korps, once the hunter, was now being hunted, chased eastward by Allied forces that moved faster than German logistics could comprehend. At the heart of that speed was not a tank, not a truck, but a small four-wheel drive utility vehicle that seemed to be everywhere at once, the American Willys Jeep. German patrols saw them on every road, darting between convoys, carrying officers, medics, radio operators, and sometimes towing artillery half their size. They appeared from dust clouds, crossed minefields, and vanished over ridgelines before German spotters could even react. In terrain that punished heavier vehicles, the Jeep thrived. Its low weight and high clearance allowed it to climb dunes that half-tracks avoided. It could be lifted by hand, repaired in minutes, and kept running on whatever fuel was available. To German observers, the vehicle seemed almost careless: open frame, exposed wiring, and a crude dashboard made from stamped steel. Yet despite its simplicity, it never seemed to fail. When one was finally captured near Sfax, the engineers of Heereswaffenamt, the German Army Weapons Office, insisted it be shipped back to Germany for study. The order was signed within hours. The little American machine would make the long journey north, not as a trophy, but as a mystery waiting to be solved. The Kummersdorf proving ground, 25 kilometers south of Berlin, had already become the graveyard of captured Allied machines. Tanks, rifles, and aircraft were dismantled there piece by piece, each a puzzle for Germany's best engineers. When the American Jeep arrived in late spring 1943, the technicians expected little. To them, it looked primitive, even laughably so, more a farm tractor than a military vehicle. But its capture coincided with a growing unease inside Germany's engineering corps. Reports from the front spoke of Allied equipment that simply refused to brake, engines that started in freezing rain, transmissions that never jammed, trucks that crossed terrain where German convoys bogged down. The Jeep was to be tested not for its firepower, but for its endurance. Within days, it was rolled into the testing yard. German officers noted its serial markings: Willys Overland Motors, Toledo, Ohio. The data sheet claimed an engine capacity of 2.2 liters and 60 horsepower, unimpressive by German standards, yet its curb weight was barely half that of a Kübelwagen. The first tests began with skepticism. They ran it cold. They drove it through mud, sand, and gravel. They overloaded it with 4 men and supplies. Still it kept running, indifferent to abuse. Each hour it ran longer than expected, and every mile widened the silence among the engineers. When word reached Berlin that the American light car had passed every trial without failure, Albert Speer's armaments ministry requested a full report. It was the beginning of a quiet revelation, one that would shake German engineering pride to its core. At Kummersdorf, the engineers began their study the German way, methodically, precisely, and with a certain arrogance. They stripped the Jeep down to its frame, laying each component across white cloth tables. At first glance, it confirmed their bias: crude welds, flat panels, open bolts, and a basic 4-cylinder engine that looked more suited for a farmyard than a battlefield. But then came the second look and the realization. Every part fit perfectly. Each bolt was standard. Every bearing identical in size. The gearbox, though simple, shifted cleanly without double clutching. The leaf spring suspension, built from layered steel strips, flexed with remarkable strength, and the air filter, an oil bath type designed to trap sand and dust, had protected the engine perfectly through hundreds of miles of desert use. The report's language shifted from mockery to respect. No unnecessary complexity, one note read. Maintenance possible by untrained personnel. Another comment compared it favorably to the Kübelwagen, Germany's own light field car. The Kübelwagen's air-cooled engine was precise but intolerant to overheating, its suspension fragile under load. The Jeep, by contrast, could carry more weight, absorb more punishment, and be fixed with nothing but basic tools. What astonished the engineers most was standardization. The Jeep's components were not handcrafted but pressed, stamped, and bolted together in exact replication, meaning any Jeep could be repaired with parts from another, anywhere in the world. For Germany, where every manufacturer built slightly different versions of the same vehicle, this concept was revolutionary. One engineer reportedly remarked that it was not a vehicle, it is an idea of production. An idea that reflected an industrial maturity Germany simply did not possess. The tests continued, and now curiosity turned into admiration. In the field, the Jeep's influence went far beyond engineering. It transformed how Allied armies moved, communicated, and fought. German officers at the front began reporting the same observation. Where there is an American soldier, there is a Jeep. In North Africa, they saw it carrying medical stretchers across shell-torn ground where trucks would have sunk. In Sicily, it climbed slopes meant only for mules, bringing ammunition to frontline infantry. In France, it towed light artillery through forests and rubble, operating night and day with minimal maintenance. The Kübelwagen, in comparison, was a gentleman's car, tidy, deliberate, built for paved roads and orderly logistics. The Jeep was a brawler. Soldiers overloaded it with crates, weapons, fuel cans, even livestock, and it kept going. Mechanics joked that the Jeep didn't require repair, only rest. Captured correspondence from German officers in Italy described these small American cars as the most practical weapon of movement we have yet encountered. Some Wehrmacht units began using captured Jeeps themselves, repainting the white star with black crosses. They learned what American troops already knew, that the Jeep's strength was not its speed or armor, but its indifference to punishment. In tactical operations, that indifference became strategic power. Commanders could visit multiple units in a single day. Forward observers could reach artillery sites quickly. Wounded men could be evacuated in minutes instead of hours. The simple machine multiplied efficiency across the entire Allied war machine. The Germans, whose doctrine depended on synchronization and careful planning, found themselves outpaced by an army that could improvise on wheels. What they saw as simplicity was, in truth, liberation through design, the ability to keep moving when everything else stopped. By the time Kummersdorf finished its tests, the Jeep was no longer a curiosity. It was a warning. By summer 1943, the Jeep's fate at Kummersdorf shifted from experiment to revelation. German engineers, under the direction of the Heereswaffenamt, conducted full endurance trials, continuous operation over rough ground, obstacle runs, cold starts, and water crossings. The results unsettled them. After more than 2,000 kilometers, the American vehicle required no significant maintenance. The gearbox remained clean, the differential seals intact, and the leaf springs unbroken. Even the spark plugs showed uniform wear, a sign of steady combustion efficiency. When the Jeep was weighed and measured again, its data contradicted everything the engineers believed about durability and design. In Germany's factories, vehicles demanded expert calibration and fine tolerances. But the Jeep ran on what German technicians would call rough precision, built to looser margins, but in a way that made it nearly indestructible. The discovery shook their faith in their own craftsmanship. An engineer's memo, preserved in postwar archives, recorded his astonishment. The Americans build with confidence in their materials. We build with fear of failure. The statement summarized the deeper difference between the two industrial philosophies. Germany designed machines to impress. America built machines to last. When Kummersdorf sent its final technical summary to Albert Speer's armaments ministry, the verdict was blunt. The Jeep represented an achievement of mass industrial discipline. It required no genius to operate and almost no training to maintain, qualities that Germany, already starved of skilled labor, desperately needed but could not replicate. For once, the vaunted German engineering establishment had no rebuttal. A four-cylinder engine from Ohio had exposed the limits of a nation that prided itself on perfection, and the test reports were only the beginning. Soon, even front-line officers would see what their engineers already knew. In Berlin, the findings reached Albert Speer himself. The armaments minister, already struggling to maintain production amid Allied bombing, understood what those reports implied. America wasn't just outproducing Germany, it was out-engineering it through simplicity. Factories in Toledo and Detroit were building more Jeeps each month than Germany could build armored vehicles in a year. Each one was identical, same bolts, same engine, same gearbox. The power of standardization was total. When one Jeep broke, another could be cannibalized instantly. No recalibration, no blueprint differences, no delays. Speer privately acknowledged that Germany could never match such industrial rhythm. His engineers had created machines that required artisans. The Allies had created machines that required workers, millions of them, coordinated through an industrial machine that functioned with mathematical precision. At the Kummersdorf test range, the Jeep outlasted both a Kübelwagen and a Stower Type 40 light car. While the German vehicles needed repairs after less than 800 kilometers, the Jeep was still running, its engine humming evenly, tires worn but serviceable. Mechanics who once mocked its childlike construction now lined up to drive it. Reports sent to the Waffenamt described the test as demoralizing. The same department that had dismissed American automotive technology as inferior now admitted the opposite. Its operational dependability represents a level of design maturity beyond our reach under wartime conditions. That admission was never published, but its echoes appeared in post-war interviews with engineers who had witnessed the trials. One later said, "It was the moment we realized we had already lost the industrial war." By autumn 1943, the Jeep had become a symbol of something far larger, a mechanical embodiment of a nation's manufacturing soul. And while Speer's ministry tried to adapt, the truth could not be undone. By 1944, Jeeps appeared in nearly every theater of war, from the hedgerows of Normandy to the snowfields of the Ardennes. German soldiers saw them more often than tanks. They carried officers, paratroopers, radio sets, even generals. Captured examples were immediately pressed into service. The Wehrmacht repainted them with black crosses, fitted German jerrycans to the rear, and used them for reconnaissance and courier runs. Reports from Italy and the Eastern Front mention entire German patrols moving in Jeeps taken from Allied units. They preferred them over their own light cars, despite fuel compatibility issues. A field officer in France wrote that the American machine was so reliable that it feels unnatural. Mechanics were stunned to find that after thousands of kilometers, critical components still met original tolerances. For an army accustomed to constant maintenance, it was almost unbelievable. To the Germans who drove them, the Jeep became more than a trophy, it was a confession on wheels. Every kilometer it traveled reminded them of what their own factories could no longer achieve. When the war finally ended, the Jeep's legacy continued to roll across Europe, this time not as an enemy's tool, but as a model for rebirth. Engineers from every defeated nation studied it. The Soviets reverse-engineered it into the GAZ-67, while French and Italian factories adapted its frame for post-war utility vehicles. Even Germany, rebuilding its industry under Allied supervision, quietly incorporated the Jeep's lessons into early Bundeswehr prototypes. In the ruins of Kummersdorf, Allied investigators found the Jeep's test logs, oil-stained pages filled with reluctant admiration. One entry written by a German technician simply read, "No failure recorded." It was as much an epitaph for a philosophy as it was for a vehicle. Across the Atlantic, Willys Overland rebranded the same design for peace, the CJ2A, the civilian Jeep. Farmers, miners, and construction crews bought it by the tens of thousands. What began as a soldier's tool became a post-war icon. For the Germans who once tested it, the memory lingered of a small, square American machine that had quietly proven a devastating truth. Simplicity, not sophistication, had conquered them. In the story of World War II, the Jeep stands as more than a vehicle. It is a symbol of an idea. Where Germany built complexity, America built continuity. The Jeep's power lay not in horsepower or armor, but in the industrial wisdom that shaped it. Build it simple, build it strong, build it for everyone. What the engineers at Kummersdorf discovered was not just a machine that worked, but a reflection of an entire nation's capability, a culture of production where function mattered more than prestige. Every bolt, every weld spoke of confidence in process over perfection. When the war ended, many German engineers would later admit the lesson was humbling. They had pursued mastery, the Americans had pursued reliability, and won. 80 years later, the descendants of that small desert-tested Jeep still move across the world's roads and battlefields. Their sound is familiar, the steady hum of purpose over pride. A reminder that in the harsh arithmetic of war, it isn't the most complex machine that endures, it's the one that simply refuses to stop.